Hey everyone, it's Jimmy with a reminder to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell and turn on all notifications. Also, don't forget to drop a quick comment saying where you're listening from, since that really helps me out in the algorithm. On a warm late summer afternoon in 1984, a group of teenagers boating along Rhode Island's narrow river made a gruesome discovery. Floating in the water was a floral patterned sleeping bag, tightly secured with rope and weighed down by a cement cinder block. Inside, authorities found the body of 24-year-old Deborah Stone. The state medical examiner later confirmed what the scene had already suggested. Deborah had met with foul play. This chilling find on September 2nd, 1984, in the quiet town of Narragansett, marked the beginning of a decades-long search for the truth about what happened to Deborah Stone. In the days before her body surfaced, Deborah had simply vanished. The young woman was last seen on the night of August 28, 1984, when she went to visit an acquaintance, 32-year-old Robert Jeremiah, in Johnston, Rhode Island. According to witnesses and Jeremiah's own statements, Deborah had come by hoping to barter a stolen watch in exchange for drugs. Jeremiah, a man known to be involved in drug dealing and rumored to have possible mob connections, claimed he had no drugs to offer that night. He later told police that he gave Deborah a ride back to her apartment in Cranston and that she was alive and well when he left her. In fact, a few other people even reported seeing Deborah on August 30th, 2 days after her visit to Jeremiah. These accounts initially muddied the timeline of her disappearance and gave Jeremiah an air of plausible innocence in the early stages of the investigation. When questioned by investigators after Deborah's body was found, Jeremiah stuck to his story and offered an alternate explanation for her death. He claimed that Deborah had probably just overdosed on drugs. However, this story quickly fell apart. The medical examiner's autopsy showed clear signs of trauma to Deborah's neck, definitively ruling out an overdose and pointing to strangulation as the cause of death. In other words, Deborah had been forcibly choked, not accidentally overdosed, making it apparent that her death was no accident. With Jeremiah being the last known person to see her alive, suspicions began to circle around him despite his denials. From the outset, Narragansett police had reasons to eye Robert as the prime suspect, and what follows next is either a major dropping of the ball or perhaps something more sinister. Multiple witnesses confirmed that Deborah was with Jeremiah the night she disappeared. Investigators learned that Deborah took a taxi to Jeremiah's place and even had the stolen watch with her, corroborating parts of his account of that evening. Because some witnesses believed they saw Deborah alive after that night, and parts of Jeremiah's story checked out, detectives initially held off on naming him an official suspect. In hindsight, this hesitation proved costly, and it wasn't long before more damning information surfaced. In January 1986, about a year and a half after Deborah's death, an informant came forward with a shocking confession. He told police that he had been at Jeremiah's apartment on August 29, 1984, the night of Deborah's presumed slaying, and into the early hours of August 30th. This informant revealed that he had seen Deborah's lifeless body in Jeremiah's apartment, and had even helped Jeremiah dispose of the body by dumping it into the narrow river. He recounted specific details about the crime scene, details authorities had never released publicly, which lent significant credibility to his story. According to the informant, Jeremiah himself admitted that he, quote, had to eliminate Deborah because she was stealing from him. Despite the informant's insider knowledge and involvement, the investigation hit a frustrating standstill. As credible as his testimony seemed, the informant's reliability was thrown into doubt when he failed a police-administered polygraph. In the mid-1980s, law enforcement still put considerable trust in polygraph results. So when the informant stumbled on the lie detector, detectives grew skeptical of his account. In fact, investigators terminated their cooperation with this major informant after the single failed polygraph exam, even though he agreed to take another test to prove himself. With their key witness suddenly deemed unreliable, the case against Jeremiah collapsed. No arrest was made, and the investigation into Deborah Stone's death went cold. Today, polygraph tests are recognized as unreliable, but back in the 80s, an over-reliance on that flawed tool likely derailed the case. Whether that derailing was entirely organic, though, is something I'll be investigating further in a moment. For decades, Deborah's case languished without justice. Leads dried up, and without new evidence or willing witnesses, the file eventually found its way to the cold case shelves. Robert Jeremiah, the man long suspected in the shadows, never faced a courtroom for Deborah's slaying. He continued on with his life while suspicion quietly trailed him. Jeremiah's life, however, was about to come to an end as well. He died of either natural causes or an overdose in 1995 at the age of 43. And given his age and his proclivities, I'm going to lean towards the latter over the former. As years turned into decades, it seemed possible that the truth of what happened on that August night in 1984 might never fully come to light. Deborah's family and friends were left with painful questions and no closure, the memory of her loss hanging over them for 41 years. It wasn't until recent years that Deborah Stone's story was pulled back into the spotlight. In 2019, the Narragansett Police Department decided to reopen the dormant case, spurred by a fresh look at old evidence and a determination to set things right. Around the same time, Rhode Island's Attorney General launched a dedicated cold case unit in 2023 to re-examine unsolved homicides like Deborah's. This new unit brought together veteran investigators and modern forensic resources with a clear mission: deliver long-awaited answers for victims' families. Cold case investigators began meticulously retracing the original investigation. They combed through old reports, revisited physical evidence, and, perhaps most critically, tracked down and re-interviewed witnesses from the 1980s. Over an 11-month period, the team interviewed 32 people connected to the case, effectively reliving the investigation step by step. The passage of time had not weakened the witnesses' memories or their resolve. Remarkably, all of their statements in the present day lined up with what they had said decades earlier. Among those they spoke to was the very same informant from 1986. After so many years, he was still willing to tell his story. In fact, when detectives showed up at his door, the first thing he said was, "I've been waiting for you," indicating his eagerness to work with the cops. His account remained consistent with the details he'd provided back in the 80s, reinforcing that his testimony had been truthful all along. Crucially, investigators recognized that the only thing which had saved Jeremiah from being charged in the 1980s was the misplaced faith in a polygraph test. With that barrier removed, the accumulated evidence against Jeremiah became overwhelming. By late 2025, Rhode Island authorities were ready to declare Deborah Stone's case solved at last. Attorney General Peter Nerona publicly announced that investigators had concluded Robert Jeremiah was the person responsible for Deborah's death. The reopened investigation had pieced together a compelling narrative of what happened. Deborah was strangled to death in Jeremiah's apartment, and her body was secretly transported and dumped in the narrow river shortly thereafter. According to the cold case unit, there was now more than enough evidence to have charged Jeremiah with Deborah's slaying and likely win a conviction in court. Of course, this last piece is a bittersweet victory at best, since Jeremiah would never face justice for his crimes. I've got some thoughts on this case since it just doesn't sit right with me. Looking back at the way investigators handled Robert Jeremiah in the mid 1980s, it's hard not to feel a deep sense of disbelief. Here was a man openly dealing drugs, whispered to have mob ties, and directly linked to the last confirmed moments of Deborah Stone's life. Yet he was never arrested, never charged, and barely pressured. The fact that police let him walk away at a moment when the case was still warm has always raised uncomfortable questions. Detectives had an informant willing to implicate both himself and Jeremiah, offering specific, non-public details about the disposal of Deborah's body. They had Jeremiah's shifting explanations, his suspiciously casual claim that she must have overdosed, and an autopsy that clearly contradicted that. But instead of building on the momentum, investigators stopped cold after one failed polygraph. Notably, while polygraphs weren't as discredited as they are today, they were still a highly controversial investigative tool even back in the 80s. It's impossible to ignore the broader context. This was an era when organized crime had significant influence in parts of Rhode Island. No one has ever proven corruption in Deborah's case, but the optics are undeniably troubling. A mob-connected dealer avoids arrest, despite being the last person seen with a woman who ended up strangled and hidden in a weighted sleeping bag. At best, it was a catastrophic investigative misjudgment. At worst, it hints at forces operating behind the scenes. It was 2 a.m. in the quiet of Mule Creek State Prison. This wasn't the main cell block, but one of the private apartment-like units reserved for the prison's family visit program. An inmate, 54-year-old David Brinson, used a phone to call correctional officers, reporting a medical emergency. His wife, he claimed, had passed out. Prison fire department staff responded, attempting life-saving measures, but it was too late. Within the hour, 62-year-old Stephanie Dowles was pronounced dead. Brinson's call was the start of a cover-up. What appeared to be a tragic medical event was, in reality, a killing. And it wasn't the first time this had happened. In fact, it wasn't even the first time that year. Stephanie was visiting her husband David Brinson at the time, but he wasn't just any inmate. He was a notorious killer, convicted in the 1990s for the execution-style slayings of 4 men during a robbery in Los Angeles. His sentence was absolute, 4 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. He was a man the state of California had legally determined was beyond rehabilitation. Yet, he was granted the privilege of a multi-day, unmonitored visit with his wife in a private unit. Stephanie's family's confusion was profound. They couldn't understand how, given Brinson's violent history, he was ever eligible for such a visit in the first place. The investigation into Stephanie's November 2024 death was slow, and for months it was shrouded in silence. Brinson's initial report that Stephanie had passed out from a medical event was, at least for a time, the prevailing narrative. The prison and the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, or CDCR, released no public information. The breakthrough came not from a confession, but from the methodical work of the Amador County Coroner's Office. In March 2025, 4 long months after her death, the coroner's findings were finally made public. Stephanie's death was caused by strangulation. Brinson's lie was exposed. The Amador County District Attorney's Office, led by Todd Reby, had to wait for the prison's own complete investigation before filing charges. Finally, on August 14, 2025, 9 months after Stephanie was slain, Brinson was formally charged. The delay and the official silence were devastating, but what Stephanie's family and the public didn't know was that the CDCR was already sitting on a dark secret. Stephanie Dowles wasn't the first woman slain in the Mule Creek family visiting units that year. She was the second. 4 months earlier, in July 2024, 47-year-old Tanya Thomas arrived at the same prison for a 4-day, 3-night visit with her partner, Anthony Curry. The circumstances of her death are a chilling echo of Stephanie's. On the morning of July 1st, 2024, Curry used the intercom in the visiting unit to call correctional staff, reporting that his partner was having a medical emergency. Tanya Thomas was found unconscious and pronounced dead. Like Brinson, Curry was a violent offender serving a life sentence. And just like Stephanie's case, the coroner's report on Tanya would later confirm the cause of death was strangulation. 2 violent inmates serving life sentences, 2 identical quote-unquote medical emergency alibis, and 2 strangulations. This wasn't a tragic, isolated incident. It was a pattern. The slayings of Stephanie Dowells and Tanya Thomas exposed a stunning and paradoxical flaw at the heart of California's family visit program. California is one of only a handful of states that still allows these extended overnight visits, often called conjugal visits. Notably, these visits place the privacy of the couple above security, a fact that has now come under heavy criticism. As of now, David Brinson remains charged but not yet convicted of killing Stephanie Dowells. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here, reminding you to subscribe and hit the notification bell and turn on all those notifications. Also remember to check out the membership option by clicking join or hit the Patreon link in the description. On the morning of July 20th, 2019, a Lafayette County deputy was on a routine patrol when he stumbled upon a scene that was anything but routine. At an abandoned, desolate fishing camp near Sardis Lake, Mississippi, he found a body. The location was remote, some 30 miles from the bustling campus of the University of Mississippi, commonly known as Ole Miss. The victim, found near a picnic table, was quickly identified as 21-year-old Alexandria Costial, a student at the university. Her purse and IDs were found nearby, ruling out robbery. Foul play was immediately apparent. Allie, as she was known to her friends, had been shot multiple times. Investigators on the scene were struck by the sheer brutality. She had been shot at least 9 times. This wasn't a random act of violence. This level of overkill was personal, pointing to a perpetrator driven by a deep, volatile rage. The discovery sent a shockwave through the community. Allie Costial was well liked and respected. A native of St. Louis, Missouri, she was a senior staying in Oxford to take summer classes. She was ambitious and bright, studying marketing with dreams of working in the fashion industry. On campus, she was a leader, teaching yoga and Pilates, and founding the student golf club. Investigators moved quickly to Allie's apartment, searching for any clue that could explain her final hours. They hit an immediate roadblock. Her cell phone was missing. It was a clear attempt by the perpetrator to erase their digital connection and any record of their final communications. But the killer made a critical technological mistake. In his haste to destroy the phone, he'd forgotten something. On her bedside table, police found Allie's Apple Watch. Even with the phone gone, her most recent text messages had synced to the watch. The watch, in effect, became the prosecution's star witness. It provided investigators with a digital map of Allie's life and her anxieties, and it offered up a single, strong, and immediate lead. The last person Allie had been in contact with, the person her final messages were with, was a 22-year-old fellow student named Brandon Thiesfeld. But the watch didn't just provide a name, it provided a motive. The text logs revealed what investigators called life-changing news. For the past 3 months, Allie had been communicating with Thiesfeld, about a terrifying possibility. She was concerned she might be pregnant. Because of that simple synced device, this case was never a whodunit. Within hours of finding Allie's body, police had a primary suspect and the quote-unquote problem he desperately wanted to solve. Allie and Brandon Thiesfeld first met in 2016. Their relationship, however, was a complicated one. Friends described it as an on and off affair, but they were never an official couple. Allie was clearly more attached to him than he was to her, an attachment that confused her friends, who said Thiesfeld treated her poorly and sent her rude text messages. Thiesfeld's reputation on campus matched this private behavior. A former dorm neighbor described him in no uncertain terms as extremely arrogant. Thiesfeld constantly referenced his father's money and bragged that his dad could get him out of anything. This was the man Allie turned to in April 2019 when she feared she was pregnant. She texted him her concerns and even sent a photo of an inconclusive home pregnancy test. His reaction was immediate and cold. He messaged her that he wasn't ready to become a parent and that becoming a father would ruin his life. For the next 3 months, Allie tried to do what any reasonable person would. She tried to meet with him in person to discuss what to do. But Thiesfeld refused. He avoided her, canceling plans at the last minute. This digital-only relationship gave him all the power. He could ignore her, and she had no recourse. Her desperation for a simple, face-to-face conversation would become her greatest vulnerability. As the prosecution would later argue, Thiesfeld didn't just see this as a difficult situation. It wasn't just the potential child. It was Allie herself, the inconvenience that threatened his consequence-free lifestyle. Tragically, this entire motive was based on a fear, not a confirmed fact. An autopsy, and a later admission from Thiesfeld's own defense attorney, would confirm the awful irony. Allie Kostial wasn't pregnant at any point. After Allie's initial texts in April, his Google search history showed him looking up ways to end a pregnancy without her knowing. He was looking for a simple solution. But by July, his mindset had shifted from ending a pregnancy to ending a life. On July 12th, Allie texted him again, this time with photos of 2 more ambiguous pregnancy tests. This appears to have been the trigger. That same day, Thiesfeld drove from Mississippi to his home in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. He returned with a pistol, a weapon that had been purchased by his father. His internet searches became sinister. He was no longer looking for pills. He was researching silencers, suppressors, and ammunition types. Most disturbingly of all, he made a bunch of searches about Ted Bundy and wanted to find insights into how he lured his victims. Also, perhaps this doesn't bear mentioning, but I found it to just reveal what an arrogant amateur this idiot actually was. He also searched up, quote, what button does what on a Glock? For all his dark fantasies, he didn't even know how to use his weapon of choice. The plan was put into motion on the night of July 19th, 2019. Allie's evening began normally. Prosecutors later claimed that he had taken inspiration from Ted Bundy in committing his own crime, deciding to disarm Allie with charm. At 7 that night, she had a happy phone call with her mother, Cindy. They had just spent time decorating her apartment for the upcoming school year, and Allie was excited. She told her mom she'd just woken from a nap and was planning to go out with friends. Surveillance footage confirms she did just that. At 11:52 p.m., cameras captured Allie leaving a bar called Funky's in Oxford Square. She was safe. Just minutes later, at 11:57 p.m., video shows her getting into an Uber alone. She arrived at her apartment safely around midnight. But sometime after she got home, the trap was sprung. She received the one message she had been waiting 3 months for. Brandon Thiesfeld had finally agreed to meet. Around 1:28 a.m., security footage and phone data show Thiesfeld's truck pulling up to her apartment. Believing she was finally going to get the face-to-face conversation she so desperately needed, Allie voluntarily got in his truck. But according to Brandon, this wasn't to be a discussion for an apartment parking lot, and he suggested they take a drive. Unfortunately, Allie trusted Thiesfeld and she went along with him. Thiesfeld drove her 30 minutes away from campus, away from the town, to the pre-selected abandoned fishing camp at Sardis Lake. Phone data from both Allie and Thiesfeld pinged at that remote location at the time of the shooting. There, he shot her and dumped off her body. Just hours later, the deputy on patrol would find her body. Thiesfeld's plan unraveled almost immediately, thanks to the Apple Watch. When investigators called him for questioning, he kept making excuses, promising to come in on Monday. He never intended to. On Monday, July 22nd, when he failed to appear, police, who had already obtained an affidavit, began tracking his cell phone. He was fleeing. The data showed him driving north toward Memphis, Tennessee. Authorities issued an alert for his pickup truck. It was easy to identify, thanks to its arrogant custom vanity plate which read, "Take it." He was arrested without incident at a Memphis gas station, and dashcam video captured the end of his short run. Unsurprisingly, he wasn't quite as tough when he was confronted by police. Either that or his self-preservation instinct kicked in. The evidence he was caught with was overwhelming. He still had blood on his clothes. Inside his truck, the cops found his dad's Glock, which was a match for the shell casings found at the crime scene. The case was sealed, but there was one more piece. Back in his apartment, police found a letter he'd written to his parents that weekend. Prosecutors called it a confession. In it, he wrote, quote, "I've always had terrible thoughts, blaming them on substance usage." He apologized for them and said that he was either going to die on the run or end up in jail for life. A prediction which would have been prophetic if it wasn't so obvious. In August 2019, a grand jury indicted Brandon Thiesfeld on capital offense charges. The charge rested on the allegation that he had kidnapped Allie by luring her to the lake under false pretenses. He was facing the death penalty, and despite the overwhelming evidence, he initially pled not guilty. After significant delays due to the events of 2020, the case came to a pragmatic conclusion. He agreed to life without parole in an effort to spare his own life and with the potential for a conditional release when he's 65 years old. Personally, I think having spent your entire adult life in prison and then being turned out to the world at age 65 sounds like another level of punishment entirely. In court, Thiesfeld, who had reportedly shown no emotion for 2 years, broke down during sentencing. He read a statement to Allie's family, saying he was, quote, "sincerely sorry for the pain he'd caused, that there is no excuse for his actions." Allie's family responded with a victim impact statement, read in court by the assistant district attorney. Her mother, Cindy, wrote that their lives had been shattered by her loss. Thiesfeld's own mother, in a separate statement, said she was disturbed that her son didn't share his inner demons with his family. She urged other parents to have a talk with their own children about their deepest, darkest secrets, which, given the context of what kind of guy Thiesfeld was, I find questionable. His parents had clearly raised an affluenza-style kid who was being handed everything, so their cautionary tale is much deeper than having a little talk now and then.